What a Savior. And happy Father's Day to all you dads out there. We love you. We have a lot of people across the nation joining us via live stream right now, as well as people from around the world. I just looked at the very long list of countries that's joined us so far. God bless you. May God speak to your hearts as well today. Well, guys, listen, I just want to let you know, before you go today, we have a gift for you. They may throw that up on the screen. You're just not going to want to miss this. They're socks with mustaches on them. So, yeah, it doesn't get much better than that, guys. We just love the men here at Cottonwood. Anyway, for every guy that's in here, you can pick up your socks. There you go, on the way out. You thought I was kidding. Now, I do have something to share with you today, so give somebody a high five. You can have a seat. I heard about a young girl came home from high school one day and asked her dad a question. Said, "Daddy, all the kids at school, they're always talking about how much their parents fight, and I notice you and Mom almost never fight. How is that?" He said, "Well, baby, we used to fight a fair bit, but that's until one of us realized I was always wrong, so there's no point anymore." You know, my dad passed away in October of 2017. I still miss him all the time. And his spot, he would sit in a little couch out there in the foyer. Some of you probably passed him not knowing he was my dad on the way in, but just throw a picture of him up on the screen. This is a little more than a year before he went to heaven. It was St. Patrick's Day, hence his little St. Patrick's bow tie there. But that was my dad in his 89th year, and I do miss him. He was affectionately known as Doc. Go ahead and take that down. I want to share with you some prescriptions from the doctor. Some things I learned from Doc, from my dad, growing up. And you know, like Paul spoke in the book of Romans, my dad was one of those. Even though he didn't get saved until he was in his 50s, the work of the law was written in his heart. And, you know, he was trying to do it right. He wasn't saved. And there was a lot of just good things that I learned from my dad growing up. But before I get into those, just so you don't get the idea he was perfect, he certainly wasn't. You know, my dad would not throw anything away. He went through the Great Depression. That affected him, as well as twice that I know of, his family lost everything due to floods. He was raised very poor, and one time had to be rescued from the roof of his house with his siblings and my grandparents by someone in a rowboat, but literally lost everything they owned twice in his life. And somehow that affected him very deeply, and he just couldn't throw anything away. Just no, we'll need that sometime. I mean, even food that should have been thrown away, he would not get rid of it. I remember after Mom passed, 7 months after Dad did, my sister and I are cleaning out their house and the garage, and we'd gotten this big dumpster out in front of the house. We filled it up with unusable things from the garage, and we thought, we need another dumpster. So they took that one away full, and we got a bigger one. It was 8 feet high, 7.5 feet wide, and 22 feet long. We filled that up like 3 times with just unusable stuff. I mean, what do you do with 30 empty paint cans? And it kind of went on, and that was just one of his deals, and we actually fought about that, you know, towards the end, because it just got crazy. Dad wasn't big on giving affirmation or praise. Again, just a sort of a product of how he was raised. And so if he did ever affirm you or praise you, you knew it was a big deal because it was so rare. And then Dad wasn't big on showing affection either. Not to my mom. I don't remember ever growing up, or to me or to my sister. Again, just a product of the environment he was raised in. I will say, though, after he got saved, he got better at some of those things, at showing affection and giving affirmation. He sort of grew incrementally in those things. When it came to throwing stuff away, he just got worse. He was a work in progress, like all of us are. But there was some really good things that I did learn from Dad, and I want to talk to you about those. And I'm actually just going to use the word Father as an acrostic today. So F, that stands for friends. Proverbs 17 and verse 17, a friend loves at all times. If my dad was your friend, he would stick with you. Didn't matter if you were up or down, in or out, good season, bad season. If he was your friend, that was it. He was your friend for life. Proverbs 18:24 says, friends come and go, but a true friend sticks by you like family. Most translations just say there's a friend who sticks closer than a brother. Often in life, my dad told me, says, listen, you will be lucky if you have 2 or 3 close friends in your lifetime. You'll have many acquaintances, but very, very few close, true friends. And I've actually found that to be fairly accurate. Jesus had an inner circle, Peter, James, and John. There was the 12, but there were 3 that were closer than anyone else. When he went into Jairus' house to raise Jairus' daughter from the dead, everyone else was put outside. He took Peter, James, and John with him. On the Mount of Transfiguration, he took Peter, James, and John, no one else. In the Garden of Gethsemane, he left the 9 there and he went further in the garden to agonize and pray. Who did he take with him? Peter, James, and John. Now, he loved the 12, but there were 3 that were in that very inner circle, and then there was the 9, and then there was the 70, and then there were the multitudes. And there's different levels of relationship and friendship, that we experience in life. Those that are in my inner circle, to me, they're the ones that if I make a fool of myself, they don't believe I've done a permanent job of it. And I can be myself around them. Howard Hughes, it's reported that he said this when he was worth approximately $4 billion. He said, I would give it all for one true friend. Listen, if you have some true friends, you should be thankful. Jackie Robinson was the first African-American to come up and play Major League Baseball. He was brought up from the minors to join the Brooklyn Dodgers in 1947 and influenced our nation in a great way, and certainly baseball. Rookie of the Year that year, National League Most Valuable Player another year, 6-time All-Star. The number 42 was retired from every baseball team, not just the Dodgers. That had never happened in any sport in our nation before. Probably the most significant thing, other than he's in the Hall of Fame, was that he broke down that wall of segregation that had existed for 60 years in baseball, and that spilled over into society. He really had a big, big impact in our country, but there's a backstory to that as well. When news came that they were bringing him up from the farm team to play on the Dodgers, some of the other players began circulating a petition that basically said, if you bring him up, you may as well trade us because we won't play for you. They were bigoted. And so they're getting all the players to sign it. And the shortstop at that time for the Brooklyn Dodgers was Pee Wee Reese, and they thought for sure he'd sign it. He's just an old Kentucky boy. And Pee Wee Reese said, I'm not signing that. It's wrong. And he refused to sign it. And Pee Wee Reese was so well respected and so well liked. His refusal to sign that petition just killed it. It lost all traction right there. They brought Jackie Robinson up, and he and Pee Wee Reese became good friends. Now, in every single ballpark that they played in, Jackie Robinson experienced extreme verbal abuse taunts and jeers, racial slurs from players and from fans everywhere they went. One time in particular, Robinson had made an error and it just got really bad. Pee Wee Reese at shortstop calls timeout, goes over, puts his arm around Jackie's shoulder, and he just glares at the crowd. Doesn't say anything, just glares at him until it just becomes deathly quiet. That arm around his shoulder said, look, he's my friend. You mess with him, you mess with me. Later on, Jackie Robinson said, that arm around my shoulder that day saved my career. And when Jackie Robinson died, I think it was 1972, Pee Wee Reese was one of the pallbearers at his funeral. He carried him at his death, just like he'd carried him in life. And that's what friends do. They stay with you and they carry you through the hard times of life. So if you've got friends, you should be thankful for them. All right, we come to our next letter, A. Always be learning. Always be developing your gifts. Explore, grow. Proverbs 1 and verse 5 says, a wise man will hear and increase learning, and a man of understanding will attain wise counsel. My dad was a perpetual student. He was always learning. He was always increasing. And not just in the scriptures, but in life. He was always learning something. He was always reading something, always exploring something. You know, he would explore and learn everything he could about Native American religions and culture, and actually went on to learn key phrases in like a dozen different Native American languages. He spoke a fair bit of French as well. He could carry on a rudimentary conversation with anybody in French. He was a dentist. He loved nature. He studied the etymology of words and phrases. He was a painter. In fact, I've got a few just pictures of some of his paintings I took. Why don't you throw those up there? That's Bora Bora. My dad painted that a long time ago. That's a place we hiked in the high Sierras. There's another spot that we fished and hiked. Yeah, you know what that is? But that's all Dad's work. He painted things that he loved. And that's me, I think as a teenager. Anyway, you get the idea. And he did a lot of things beyond that. He was a cartoonist. He did lots of stuff. He was multi-dimensional. He was multi-layered, but it didn't come without effort. He went forward and he pursued different interests. He pursued and developed the different gifts that God had put in him. And the lesson is, don't stop learning. Don't stop growing. Don't stop exploring. Listen, there are treasures in you, but they have to be dug out. Every one of us, you're not just a one-layered person. There's a lot of dimensions to you. God has put a lot in every one of you, in every one of us. And it would be a shame to live and die and never explore and develop those things that are inside of you. Always be learning. Try something new. I'm telling you, there's stuff in you. And for your own benefit and joy in life, you should develop those things, but also for the benefit of others. Other people need those things God put in you. He didn't put them in there just to lay dormant. He wants you to tap into them and develop them, learn, grow, and expand. All right, our next letter is T. Take time for yourself. Mark 6:31, Jesus speaking to the disciples said, and he said to them, come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while. For there were many coming and going, and they did not even have time to eat. I think my dad spoke to me about this more than any other thing, and he modeled it as well. You know, he had a very demanding practice as a dentist, and I think probably just because of his way, people felt that they could sort of seek him out at any time, and some people just didn't have boundaries. There were folks, this happened regularly, they'd come to our house. I'd be playing in the front yard. Your dad here? Yeah. They'd come up to the front door and knock, hey, Doc, I got this thing. Would you mind looking at my TV? I mean, literally, people are coming to the house, found out where we live. They're there all the time and calling the house. I remember getting in trouble, by answering the phone. Yeah, he's here. And he's going, and you can see smoke coming out of his ears, like, I want to be left alone right now. And so he had this very demanding practice as a dentist. So he would take time off and go hiking, backpacking, camping. I used to go with him as a kid every single weekend. We went into the local mountains and would spend a couple of days there. Later on, we would go into the high Sierras, spend a week and a half, and then I went off the rails as a young teenager with drugs and a whole bunch of other stuff. And so Dad no longer had me as a partner to backpack and to hike with, and so he'd take other friends with him, and when he couldn't get anybody to go, he'd go by himself. He'd spend a week in the backcountry, just by himself, fishing and hiking and exploring. But he always told me, you need to have that for yourself. Now, I think it's important, to pray and read the scriptures, absolutely. But you're also, you're an emotional being. And you need to find something that fills your emotional tank. With me, I like to golf, and I like to get out on the water. I like to fish, or I like to jump in the water and spearfish. It's very physically demanding, but it's really good for my soul. 1 Timothy 6:17 says, God gives us richly all things to enjoy. What do you enjoy? What fills that emotional tank of yours? I don't think it's a luxury that you spend time doing that. I think it's a necessity. I do those things because it allows me to give my best self to my wife and my family and to you, as the church, to live a balanced life. I work really hard. I pray and I study hard and I try and preach with all of my heart and soul, but I also play really hard. And it's important for me to do that, and I think it's important for you as well. I had the privilege years ago to become friends with a preacher named Oral Roberts, and Oral and I would golf quite often together. He actually lived here in Southern California, and he would ring me up and say, Bayless, you free? You want to go golf? I'd say, yeah, or I'd call him. And we'd golf a lot. Sometimes I'd take Harrison with us, but a lot of times it was just me and Oral. And one day we're out on the course, just the two of us playing. And I said, Oral, you've had at that time like 50 years of ministry under his belt. I said, I'm pretty new at this. I said, what's the best advice you can give me as a young minister? So I'm waiting. I'm just like, I know he's going to give me some gold. And he says, well, Bayless, you got a pretty good golf swing. I suggest you get some lessons. And whatever it costs you, you should join a country club. And then he looked at me and said, golf's the only thing that's kept me alive. And then he went back to hitting his shot. I was so disappointed. I thought, really? That's the best you've got? I sort of tucked it away and just thought, not what I expected. Maybe 3 months later, maybe even less than that, I'm in Australia. I'm preaching a national conference for a large Pentecostal group there. They found out I like to golf, so they put me out with an older guy. His name was Leo. He was one of the sort of the founding guys of the movement there in Australia. Was a bit of a legend, among that movement. And so we're golfing, walking the golf course, and Leo begins to tell me a story. He says, Bayless, in the early days of the movement, we were Pentecostal holiness, which basically meant we were very legalistic. Boys weren't allowed to wear shorts no matter how hot it got. There was never mixed bathing. Boys and girls couldn't go in the same swimming pool at the same time. Women weren't allowed to cut their hair. Boys were not allowed to play sports. We were told it was a sin for us, to play any kind of sport, so we had to abstain. He said, as a young preacher, I developed some pretty serious physical symptoms. And I went to the doctor. And the doctor said, well, Leo, after examining him, there's nothing wrong with you per se, but your health is breaking down, and I'll tell you why. He said, what's your release valve? He said, well, what do you mean? He says, what do you do as a hobby? He said, I read the Bible. He said, that's good that you read the Bible, but you need a hobby. He said, no, I read the Bible and I pray. He said, we'll keep doing that, but I'm just telling you, all the stress from life and ministry, you're carrying it with you, and if you don't do something as a relief valve, as a release valve, find some sort of a hobby, you will go to an early grave, because this is all stress related. So Leo looked at me and said, Bayless, what I did next was absolutely scandalous. I took up the game of golf. He said there was such gossip and such backlash in the denomination. He says, I got so much flack for it, but he said I wasn't going to go to an early grave. And then he turns around, we're in the middle of a fairway, he looks at me and says, Bayless, golf is the only thing that's kept me alive. I thought, I just heard the same thing recently. And then I thought back to when I was in Bible college. They brought in a missionary from Borneo. To me, that was the uttermost parts of the earth. And so I'm sitting on the edge of my seat thinking, okay, talk to me about souls. Talk to me about sacrifice. And he starts off saying, listen, I've been on the mission field a long time, and I just want to tell you, if you're going to make it as a missionary, you have to have a hobby. He said, mine is beachcombing. I collect shells. And I remember thinking, can we please get a real missionary? And I almost just turned him off. But then after I'd heard Oral and then Leo, I sort of connected the dots. And I don't look at that time that I take as a luxury. I look at it as a necessity. And by the way, I make sure my wife gets her time as well with her girlfriends and being able to do the things that she loves to do. And I have time with her as well. So it's certainly not just about me, but I want to be able to give my best, but I want my wife to be at her best as well. So I make sure that as well as myself, she gets that time. So the T is take time for yourself. We come to the next letters, H, honesty and integrity. My dad always told me, he said, son, do not be quick to give your word. But if you do give it, you keep it, or you die trying to keep it. I never knew my father once to break a promise. I never knew him to break his word to any human being ever. Psalm 15 verse 1 asks some questions. Lord, who may abide in your tabernacle? Who may dwell in your holy hill? Part of the answer is given in verse 4. He who swears to his own hurt and does not change. Keeping your word is central to having a good name. Proverbs 22:1 says, a good name is to be chosen rather than great riches. In the early days of our country, people sought out the Quakers to do business with them because it was known the Quakers would not break their word. If they shook hands and gave you a price, if they shook hands and made a deal, that was it. They wouldn't break their word even if it cost them dearly. So people sought them out and they became very prosperous based on the fact that they wouldn't break their word. I bought my daughter an old used Jeep years and years ago and needed to have some work done on it. And so I talked to a friend. I said, do you have a mechanic you can recommend? He says, well, yeah, Bayless, there's this guy. He'll even come out to your house. He's honest and he's fairly priced. I said, okay. So I called the guy. He comes to the house. So the Jeep's in the driveway, pops the hood, and he looks at it, says, okay, here's your problem. He says, I can go to the parts store, be back in 15 minutes. I can get the part. You pay for that, and it'll be $80 for me to do it. It'll take me about 30 minutes to fix it. I said, okay. So he runs off to the parts store, comes back. But the further he gets into fixing it, he realizes there's more to be done. So he knocks on my front door, says, look, I've gotten into it. This is a bigger job than I thought. I'm going to need another part. And would you mind going to the auto parts store for me? So he tells me what it is. I write it down. I go, and it was, $20, $25, whatever. I come back with the part, and he spends 3 or 3.5 hours now getting the car running right. So he gets done, and I say, okay, what do I owe you? He says, $80. I said, well, yeah, but you told me that when you thought it was, not going to be so involved, and you didn't spend a half hour. You spent more than 3 hours here, so what do I owe you? And he got mad at me. He said, listen, I know that I spent more time here, but I gave you my word. I said, $80. It'll be $80, and don't ask me again. I said, yes, sir. Paid him his $80. I will tell you, I gave him probably 50 times over that in business from recommendations that I gave to him. Everyone that ever asked me about a mechanic, now this was years and years ago. I don't even know if he's still alive. He was kind of old then. But heck, his word was important to him, and it made me want to do business with him and tell other people as well. By contrast, when we were building the facility here, there was one set of items that was absolutely essential to us getting in. And we talked to several companies. This one company we landed on, they said, okay, but we need like a 12-month lead in, to manufacture and then get it delivered here, at least 3 months ahead of time to get it all set up. We said, okay. We actually gave them a 2-year lead in. So we put the order in 2 years ahead of time. And it came time for them, to be coming with a product here, and they didn't show up on the appointed time. So we rang them. They said, oh, well, there's been a little bit of a setback. We'll be there in a few days. Okay. We wait a few days. They don't come. We ring them back. Says, oh, well, we've had ABC trouble and da-da-da-da-da, and we'll, another week at the most, and we'll have it there. So we wait 2 weeks. They don't show up. We're getting closer to the deadline. Said, look, what about the stuff? I mean, it's going to take a while to get it, everything set up and working. We can't get in without you providing what you're providing. Said, not a problem. We'll have it. We're sending it. The trucks are going out today. Okay. A few days later, nothing arrives. We call them. They say, oh, well, the trucks broke down. And then that happened twice. Trucks broke down. Now, we found out that a large part of what they were making was actually manufactured in a plant down in Mexico. And I happened to have friends that lived in that city in Mexico, so I rang them up. I said, will you do me a favor? I said, I want you to go to such and such a plant and inquire about this particular order. They went down there, called me back, says, Bayless, I got bad news. Your stuff hasn't even been manufactured yet. These guys had been stringing us along and lying to us. We got up to the time we've got to move in. We don't have anything. So we went to the city hat in hand and said, look, we're in trouble. We've advertised, this was supposed to be done. We explained, and they actually worked with us. And they may have, even willingly violated a few things to let us come in. And so we were able to manage another way. And then months and months after we're in the church, they finally delivered. I found out later they actually had used us as a reference. I happened to have at least 3 other friends across the country at that time that were all building significantly large churches, multi-thousand, seat churches. And they rang me, says, oh, Bayless. And all 3 of them rang me, Bayless, this such and such company provides this. They put you as a reference, How was your experience working with them? Should we use them? I said, look, go ahead and use them if you don't mind working with the Antichrist. That's what I told every one of them. I said, go ahead, but you're signing to deal with the Antichrist. None of them used that company. Listen, it was millions of dollars worth of work they lost because keeping their word was not important to them. If you give your word, don't be quick to give it, but if you give it, keep it, or die trying. All right, next letter is E. That's ever ready with a joke. If you knew my dad, you knew he had a sense of humor. Didn't matter what the situation was, he had a joke to fit every circumstance and every situation. Never did I ever find him without a joke, and they usually involve elaborate storytelling. I have no idea where he learned all these jokes. Proverbs 17:22 says, a merry heart does good like a medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones. Keeping one's faith in times of distress often requires a sense of humor. Martin Luther said, if God didn't have a sense of humor, I wouldn't want to go to heaven. You know, I actually heard this a couple of times, overheard people saying, who's that old guy sitting out in the foyer telling off-color jokes? He's really naughty. And somebody said, that's Pastor's dad. It's true. I mean, we'd be in the green room, we'd have a guest speaker there, guest speaker and his wife, and my dad launches into this elaborate, very wrong joke. Very inappropriate joke, but that was him, and you couldn't help but laugh because he's so old. I was at LAX one day. I got stuck in an elevator with like 7 or 8 other people. Got stuck between floors, and we got on the little phone in there, and it was dead. And we're waiting, and it was interesting. I observed everyone in the elevator. Everyone responded differently. Couple people out and out panicked. Started talking about being claustrophobic and literally panic. Couple people got extremely angry. You know, I've got a blank, flight to catch, and don't they just keep their stupid elevator in working order? Other people just this look of astonishment, like, is this really happening to me? Other people not knowing what to do. You know what I did? I started cracking jokes. No one found them funny but me. And finally, me and another guy got in and sort of did this Klingon thing, and we opened up the elevator doors, and we're literally stuck between floors like here. We lifted everybody out of the elevator, including a woman in her wheelchair. We lifted them out, and then we had to crawl out on our bellies to get out. And after that happened, I remember thinking, I'm becoming my father. I actually cracked jokes with a bunch of strangers in an elevator. But that's exactly what my dad would have done. Now, becoming like my dad in that respect, I actually don't mind. It's not a bad thing. All right, our final letter, R, stands for reciprocity. More specifically, the law of reciprocity. That when you do something good, there's a reciprocal action that takes place. My dad would put it this way. You do good things for other people, said it will come back to you. It'll always come back. I remember one time in particular, I was like 16, was at the bank, and I think I withdrew $30 from my account. And when I got outside, I realized there was 2 $10 bills stuck together. The teller had actually given me $40. I thought it was 30, she thought it was 30, but there was two bills stuck together, and it's like, whoa, $40. That was a lot of money when I was a 16-year-old. I won't tell you what I would have bought with it, but it was a lot of money back then. Could buy quite a bit of illegal stuff with $40. But I thought about what my dad had said. I went back into the bank. Big line had formed, so I got at the end of the line, waited, and then I had to wait for that teller to open up, and I finally got up there about 20 minutes later. I said, hey, I just took out $30. I said, there was 2 $10 bills stuck. You gave me 40. She was so thankful. She said, I would have had to taken that out of my wallet at the end of the day if, my transactions didn't balance. She said, thank you. And I casually, somehow the next day or so, brought that up in a conversation with my dad, and he just reiterated, says, good, son. It's one of the few times he really laid on some praise. He said, good. He said, that will come back to you. Do you know the scriptures teach that? In Galatians, the 6th chapter, verse 7, it says, whatever a man sows, that he will also reap. Jesus said it this way in Luke 6:38, give, and it will be given to you. But here's the God factor. It'll be given to you good measure, pressed down, shaken together, and running over, God will cause men to give into your bosom or to pour it into your lap. It will come back if you'll do a good turn for someone else. And there was a boy lived in the Swiss Alps, and he would go out and cup his hands, and he would shout, "Hello," and it would come back, "Hello, hello." And he would shout, "I love you," and it would echo back, "I love you, I love you, I love you." And he did that often. One day he got in a fight with his dad, went outside and shook his fist, says, "I hate you." And to his surprise, it came back, "I hate you, I hate you, I hate you." I'm telling you, there is a divine law that God has instituted. And if you will do good when it's not convenient for you, when you have no promise from that person or no way for that person to pay you back, God will see that it does come back to you eventually. And when it comes back multiplied. You know, at the end of Dad's life, he was not mobile any longer, and I would go over and shave him and clip his toenails and wash his hair and just different stuff. And I was there one day, I think I'd been shaving him, and he's laying in the bed and he's got this far-off look on his face. I said, "Dad, what are you thinking about?" He said, "Eternity." I said, "Well, what about it?" He said, "It's forever and ever and ever and forever and ever and ever and ever." And he just kept saying that over and over. He said, "It's forever." My friend, we were made for eternity. The scripture says God has put eternity in our hearts. This earthly life, it's fleeting. 70, 80, 90 years, it's here and it's gone. And then we step into eternity. Really, this life is just a dressing room for eternity. And we need to make our peace with God while we have the opportunity here, because this life, it's over quickly. You know, I specifically wore this watch here today. It was given to me by a friend. But when he gave it to me, we were just acquaintances, and we had a gathering in the house, and when he and his wife came, he gave me this little box, and I opened up, there's a watch, and I said, "Oh, thanks." Now, I assumed it was like the watches that I would buy. At that time, I had never spent more than, I think, $40 or $50 on a watch. And so he gives me this watch. Next day I'm at the office, I have it on, and Pastor Tom comes up and says, "Oh, Bayless, nice watch." I said, "Oh, thanks. Guy gave it to me last night." He said, "That's a Breitling." I said, "A what?" I'd never heard the name before. He said, "That's a Breitling. That's an expensive watch." I said, "Really?" He says, "Yeah, wait." Tom runs off to his office, comes back with the Breitling catalog. You can tell what Tom's into. During lunch break, he looks through watch catalogs. So we sit down and we find my watch in there. It actually was quite expensive. So I got on the phone right there and I called this guy up. I said, "Hey, I told you thanks for the watch last night. I want to say thank you for the watch. This is a nice gift." And so I sit back down with Tom and we start looking through the catalog, and there's another watch in there that's extravagantly expensive. It actually had a button on it that you could push, and it didn't matter where you were in the world. You could be in the middle of the Brazilian rainforest, in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and if you push that button, it sent an SOS signal out, and they would receive it anywhere in the world, and they would send a rescue team to come and get you. That watch was a lot of money. Imagine your ship goes down in the middle of the Pacific and you're on a raft bobbing around out there. There's enormous sharks swimming around your raft. And you think, what am I going to do? And then you remember, my Breitling. So you push the button, the SOS goes off, and they come in a helicopter a few hours later. Well, you wave the helicopter off. I don't want to be rescued by a helicopter. They come in a boat. No, I don't want to be rescued by a boat. I'm only going to be rescued by a submarine. You're a fool. Well, you know what? There's an SOS that goes out from every human heart to be found by God. And God did send a rescue mission, but it wasn't what most people were looking for. He sent his son, born of a virgin, laid in a feeding trough in what literally was a cave where there was animals, raised in a poor carpenter's home, but he lived a sinless life. He worked miracles, talked to people about God being near, not distant and aloof. And then he was taken by jealous hands and he was crucified. And there as he hung on that cross, suspended between heaven and earth, the just punishment against our sin was laid on Jesus as our substitute. It was God's plan all along. And Jesus willingly died under the weight of our sins. After the claims of God's justice were satisfied once and for all, on the third day Jesus was raised from the dead. And the Bible says this, if you believe that and are willing to make him the Lord of your life, that God brings you into this relationship, it's called salvation. It's not about rules and regulations. It's not about rituals and ceremonies. It's about walking and talking with your Creator. It's about knowing God is your Father. If you wouldn't mind, just bow your heads, close your eyes for a moment. I'm just going to count to 3. And then we're going to pray. When I get to 3, if you want to get in on this prayer, I'm going to ask you to just quickly lift a hand. I'll acknowledge any hands that are up. You can put it down. And then I'll lead the whole congregation in a simple prayer. Now, you certainly don't need to raise your hand for God to hear your prayer. But I ask you to do it because I believe something that simple could actually help you. The scriptures are quite clear in the book of James. It says that faith is expressed through corresponding actions. And even an action as simple as lifting a hand toward heaven, it corresponds to your heart that's reaching up toward God. It can help your faith begin to move in the right direction. If you're a prodigal son or a prodigal daughter in here today, you've had an encounter with Jesus, but right now you find yourself far from him, I want to include you in this prayer. 1, it's your moment, friend. 2, it's not a coincidence. We're together. You ready? You want to pray with me? 3, just lift your hand up all over the auditorium. Just lift it high for a minute. Keep it up. Looks like we got hands in every section. That's awesome. Way to go. All right, go ahead and put your hand down. Maybe put a hand on your heart. Let's all pray together. You say, oh God, I humble myself before you. And I want to say thank you. Thank you for loving me so much that you would allow your very own son to die in my place and pay for my sins. Jesus, thank you for going to the cross. I believe you died and that you were raised from the dead. And I ask you now, come into my life. Be my Lord and Savior. From this moment forward, Jesus, wherever you lead me, I will go. It's in your name I pray. Amen. Fantastic.